Welcome to the Sharing Without Shame podcast, dedicated to parents and anyone else who loves someone in active addiction. Education is a powerful tool in breaking down stigma, fostering understanding, and ultimately helping individuals and their loved ones navigate the challenges of addiction. With Donna Marston, author of Peeling the Onion and Sharing Without Shame. So take a deep breath and grab some tissues as we uncover the stories of love, courage, and unwavering support in the face of adversity, as Donna and her guests share their stories without shame. Because when we share our stories without shame, we inspire others to do the same.
Hello and welcome to the Sharing Without Shame podcast. I'm your host, Donna Marston, and today's podcast is sponsored by Snap Bands, a unique cognitive behavior therapy bracelet that integrates gentle physical sensations with personalized mantra cues to instantly transform unwanted negative thoughts into positive mental focus, stigma-free. To order your Snap Bands, visit snappbandz.com. That's snapbands.com. And under comments, enter SWOS or Sharing Without Shame. And this is what the Snap Band looks like. And you just give it a little snap. So today I'd like to welcome my guest, Anna Kingsley. Anna is a multifaceted therapist, combining her expertise as a psychosexual therapist, a relationship physiotherapist, and a compassionate guide for individuals grappling with substance use disorders. Her mission is to help them mend their relationships. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna, for having me.
You're very welcome. So all the way from England, Windsor,
Yes.
England, you said. Mm-hmm. What time is it there?
It is just gone 8 o'clock in the evening.
Oh boy. Good for you. I'd be getting ready for bed. First thing I like to ask is, what would you like to share without shame?
I guess what is most present in my mind, not just because it's part of my work, but it's my experience, is what it's really like to be the spouse of somebody struggling with addiction. And not just an active addiction, but what it's like to be the partner of somebody in recovery. Mm-hmm. Because we feel that the minute they get that light bulb moment that they need, they've got it and they want to work on their recovery, things become easy. And actually, it isn't easy. It's really tough. That those early years of supporting somebody through that, it takes a toll.
Sure.
On the relationship or the marriage, and it takes a toll on the two individuals.
Sure. So my understanding is that depending on when you all got together, he was active in his alcoholism while you were dating or early in the marriage, and you've had these years, you know each other that way, and then when a person goes into recovery, a new person shows up. So it's you have to re-establish the relationship and get to know each other. Can you speak on that at all?
Well, I guess yes, but when my husband and we've been together 20 years. When we first got together, there were no signs of any kind of issues at all. Mm-hmm. And in fact, his drinking only became a real problem during COVID, during lockdown. Like so many of us, he really struggled with somehow suddenly being confined and losing that social interaction. And we had 2 children. It wasn't straightforward. It was stressful. The isolation was awful. And what had become increasingly, when of course you look back with hindsight and you can see all the things you didn't see at the time, but obviously his drinking was starting to become a problem. But COVID and that whole lockdown experience just made it very difficult. So that was 2020. We had been together by that point 16 years. Right. And there really weren't signs of it being a major problem. So when he finally dealt with it, went into rehab, came out, spent a tricky year relapsing, trying to get back on the wagon, relapsing, getting back on it, resisting everything he now does. I guess what happened for me when he went into recovery was I suddenly thought, oh, I'll get my old husband back. He'll go back to the person he was,
Right.
Pre all of this. And of course, that hasn't happened either.
Right.
So I feel I'm in a part sort of still grieving that whole process and trying to make sense of it. But I'm also recognizing that the couple we were, the person I fell in love with, that's not who he is anymore.
Right.
And I have to find a way to accept that.
Well, and I think, as the dynamics change, whether marriage, I mean, we ebb and flow, right? Because
Absolutely.
some of us mature before the other, and there's different things that are going on. I mean, marriage alone is not easy. We're all works in progress, and I've been married 44 years now, something like that. A long time. And, we've grown up together, basically. Yeah. When you think about it, we got married at 25 and now we're 40 something years into our marriage. We grew up together and we didn't have to deal with that. But again, we have to kind of reestablish ourselves. We get to know each other. Sometimes we outgrow each other and then one person may catch up and one may not. And then you add alcoholism into the mix. And things,
and I guess
difficult.
I mean, I think my situation was obviously specific to me, but it wasn't just his drinking that was going on. We also had lockdown going on, which was affecting everybody. Yeah. But then on a very personal note, my best friend was dying. That was really difficult for me. So I had I was losing my best friend. I was losing my husband. I was trying to manage my kids. It was really hard. We forget when alcoholism or some form of addiction comes into our lives. It can feel like it takes over. But there are other things going on in our lives that are also problematic and need our attention. Right. And it can be exhausting.
So what were some of the coping skills that you had learned during that time that help you navigate through when he was in his active alcoholism and even when he was in and out of treatment facilities?
Well, I think I made the mistake that lots of partners do at the beginning of trying to help him, trying to protect him, trying to get him to eat, trying to get him to wake up, trying to get him in a shower, trying to, trying to give him a vitamin, trying to do all sorts of... I don't think I was ever under the belief that I was responsible for it, but I was desperately trying to help him, and that obviously wasn't helping him, and it really wasn't helping me. Luckily, I was starting my training as an addiction therapist sort of around the same time, and so I had the benefit of being around other therapists and some people who were in long-term recovery and had many years of sobriety, and they helped me. They were my lifeline in a way and guided me to say, this is not the way to handle it. You've got to find a way to detach. You've got, that's not to say divorce yourself or ignore them, but you've got to find a way to manage this so that you don't lose yourself. And eventually I found a way to do that. That meant I protected myself. I prioritized my children. I looked after myself. I stopped keeping it a secret. I think that's one of the things we all get wrong, don't we, at the beginning?
Yeah.
We're ashamed of it. We're trying to protect them. We don't want to upset them. We don't want to make it worse. We don't want people to feel bad about them. We love them. And having not been straightforward the first couple of times that there had been a lapse, after the third or fourth time, I thought, what am I doing? This is just too much for me to handle. So I stopped protecting him. I didn't put a notice in the newspaper, but I told family members, I told my friends, I stopped pretending, and I allowed them to help me. I allowed them to support me. I allowed them to invite me around for dinner. I found ways that I could go out. I'd take the kids because I didn't feel that they were safe at home with my husband. But we managed. My friends welcomed it. They made it easy for me. So I stopped pretending, I think, was the first biggest most helpful thing. I stopped pretending. And
I call it caring from a distance.
Yeah.
Right? We can still love them, but sometimes you have to take a step back. And I find, so I've done worked with a lot of families over the years, family support, and we work harder often at our loved ones' recovery than they do.
And not at ours either,
And not, right, and we need our own recovery program.
Exactly. We need our own. So yes, so I was so fortunate that I was doing this particular training and I had wise people around me. And in time, I turned to Al-Anon. I'm not religious and I was slightly put off by that at the beginning, but very quickly I realized that you could take what you want to take and you don't have to take on anything that you don't want to take on. And it was still lockdown. These were online meetings. I found one in America that actually, a New York women's Al-Anon support group, which somehow made me feel at home. And that became my lifeline. Every Saturday afternoon, that's what I would do. I would tell the kids that I was working and I'd sit there for an hour and a half and I'd listen to the wisdom in those rooms and they kept me on the straight and narrow. And they taught me some really valuable lessons. But it took quite a while for me to realize I can't do this by myself. I'm not superhuman. I think I thought that because I'm a trained therapist and because I've been working with addicts and people in recovery for a long time, I should know it all. And therefore I could handle it. But I quickly realized this is too much for one person.
So is it different? So all of everything that you learned, does it kind of go out the window when it's your personal life being affected?
Yes and no. I'm very aware of what I should do, what the therapist in me tells me to do. And then because there's this massive emotional component between me and my husband, it doesn't always play out as it should, because feelings get in the way and I, have an emotional reaction that supersedes all rational logic. But I've learned to forgive myself for all of that. I do what I can and I'm slowly getting better. I was in therapy at the time, thankfully. But the therapist I was seeing before my husband's drinking became really problematic wasn't really aware of addiction or alcoholism. They were super and wonderful and it kept me steady for many years, but it wasn't their specialty. And I realized very quickly that if I was going to stay in therapy, which I wanted to do, I needed somebody who knew something about addiction, like properly knew something about addiction. So I made a change. I found somebody who did. And that was about 2-3 years ago. And that's been another lifeline. I realized, we can't do this by ourselves.
Right.
We need support, personal and professional, to get us through this.
Right. Why did you feel the need to forgive yourself? If it's too personal, that I understand, but can you talk about why you felt that need to forgive yourself?
Well, first of all, so whilst my husband, when we got together, showed no signs of having any kind of substance abuse problem or addiction, and there's nothing in his family background that suggests this was a problem. Prior to me meeting him, I was in a relationship with somebody who had a secret gambling addiction. So when my husband's addiction came to light, I thought to myself, this cannot be a coincidence that I have found myself in long-term relationships with two people now who have difficulties managing their impulses. And that brought on a double dose of shame for me. What was my part in it? What am I doing? Am I somehow attracting these people? I didn't think I was making them have these problems, but maybe I was blind to to some of this. I didn't know. And I think really it's only been through my therapy that I've learned that whatever my role in why we choose the people we choose, I'm not responsible for their behavior and their choices. They are.
Right.
And the two partners I've had who've had these difficulties, yes, they share the fact that they have difficulties, but their experiences and their personalities are totally different. They are not the same. And I do my husband and the other partner a disservice by conflating them and just morphing, who I was in that early relationship, which is very different to who I am now.
Mm-hmm.
So I've just learnt, I think I've had to forgive myself because that double dose felt particularly painful to swallow. So I did it through therapy, and I felt like I couldn't really do it through friends alone because I needed somewhere where I could fall apart a bit and feel safe and not judged. Because your friends love you, and all my friends know my husband, but they're not objective.
Friends sometimes take sides, and that can get messy.
Yeah. And I needed my therapist to pull me up on certain things and not quite take tough love, but to allow me to think about the difficult things when I needed to think about them rather than avoid them and make it all okay, which is, I think, sometimes what my friends and my family have done because they've seen how upset I've been. Yeah. And they've seen how hard it's been to keep that marriage going and to protect our kids in the course of it, because of course they're casualties of all of this as well.
And how are your children doing with all of this?
They are doing remarkably well. They're little. It took us quite a long time to get pregnant, so our kids are young. They are 13 and 11. My daughter's quite mature. She's been okay. My son was quite upset. I think he was a bit more in tune with what was going on, and he's been a lot more angry at my husband. So I've had to step back and allow my husband to repair that relationship rather than come in and make it all better myself. And I've had to encourage my son to speak to his dad rather than just to confide in me. The kids got used to their father being unavailable, being asleep. That's what they were told. Daddy's asleep, when of course he wasn't asleep. Well, he was asleep, but it was alcohol-induced sleep. So they learned very quickly he was unreliable. Where's Dad? Daddy's not there. Daddy's asleep. And so they came to me and turned to me a lot because their father wasn't around. So gradually we've had to undo that. And I've had to step back and allow my husband and encourage my husband to step in. He's felt quite guilty and at times quite ill-equipped to know how to heal those relationships. But I think I was quite pragmatic when he entered recovery, that he couldn't do everything at once. A lot of relationships needed to be healed. And within the family, we sat down and we made a conscious decision that his relationship with our children needed to be repaired. And that took priority over our marriage. So those relationships with our two children needed his attention. They got their attention first. So let's fix those first, and then we'll fix the two of us. So I put myself sort of third in line after those two because I felt they were the ones most in need. I had my own support. I was the grown-up. They were the little ones. And they didn't understand, and they don't still quite understand yet what happened. And that's okay. They don't need to for now.
Right. And that they're, at such young ages, they don't have the verbal skills to verbalize. I'm curious how your son's anger showed up. What was that? What did that look?
Oh, that looked like all sorts of things. That looked like smashing up his room. That looked like slamming doors. That looked like defiance. That looked like lots of tears. That looked like I'm refusing to go to school. No, I'm not getting dressed. That didn't look like verbal violence, but that didn't look like physical violence. But he would just go, he would became incredibly defiant and incredibly angry. And then, of course, he just became very, very sad.
Yeah.
And so there would be moments where he would just, we had a period where, and it still happens now, he's scared of people dying. He's scared of himself dying. He's scared of losing people. He's scared of something bad happening. He's quite attached to me still. And quite often, my husband's done remarkably well, but there are times still when my husband becomes angry. Because, of course, what do they say in AA? The great news is you get your feelings back, and the bad news is you get your feelings back when you sober up. So, it's still a work in progress for all of us to learn how to manage those. So sometimes my husband gets angry, and that will send my son back to square one. Because a lot of what was happening when he was drunk would be the complete chaos. Come with nobody knows what on earth has just gone on, and my husband would get incredibly angry over something that we didn't understand and couldn't predict because he was, inebriated. And my kids were very aware that Daddy suddenly got very cross, seemingly out of the blue, because they couldn't read the signs that I could read that said, he's drunk too much. Yeah. My daughter is much more aware of it on one level. My husband used to drink vodka, hide the bottles in his bag, walk my daughter to school, and on the way to walking my daughter to school, he would deposit the empty bottles in a trash can in the street rather than put it in the household bin. So my daughter would see it. So she knew something was up.
Yeah.
And she was the one who would say, Mummy, Daddy's just put something in the cupboard. He's hidden it at the back of the cupboard. I saw him do that. So she was much more exposed to it, but on some level, but she didn't really know. My son had no idea that what my husband was doing, and I think that's why he's been more angry, because it came out of the blue for my son. And then, of course, there was a period when he was in rehab, and that had to be explained. And sod's law, we got him into rehab, and he went in the day after my son's birthday. So happy birthday, son. Tomorrow I'm going into rehab, So it's been very difficult, but I'm very proud of the way that our little family has recovered. And I feel a lot more hopeful that the marriage will recover. And I feel pretty resilient as an individual now.
Yeah.
I think one of the difficulties I have, though, is that having learnt a way to detach with love, to sort of protect myself, I'm now working out, and this is very much a work in progress, and maybe some of your listeners will have experience of this, I don't know, how you then reattach to your husband, how do you stay attached whilst also detaching, if that makes sense? Because the marriage was damaged. Trust was broken. He was unavailable. Of course, other things were going on, which was beyond his or my control, but he was unavailable to me at times when I really needed him. And there's a lot of adjustment to do. Being a, we may say that people who are in active addiction are selfish. Of course they are, but to some degree. But being in recovery is a real commitment. It takes you away from, you have to put that first. So again, family and friends and loved ones come second, because he has to go to a meeting, he has to do this, he has to do that. That's more important. There was a time, and I'm very grateful, but there was a time when he was doing 6 meetings a week, 6 evenings a week, which, had a knock-on effect on family life and had a knock-on effect on marital life, because he wasn't there. I'm glad he was at a meeting and not, passed out in our spare room, but, he was still not there. So there's a lot of work that he and I still need to do. And I guess I'm lucky that I'm guided to some extent by my training and my profession. And I'm guided by my clients who, I'm very lucky that they share their lives and their experiences, because as a therapist, you learn from your clients as much as they learn from you. And I've been working with people in recovery for 10, 12 years now. So they give me hope. But it's been really tough at times. I won't kid you. I've considered divorce. I've considered kicking him out. I'm glad we didn't do that. But it takes its toll.
Yeah. And I think everybody has to figure out a recovery program for themselves.
Yes.
When my son finally found his way into his pathway to recovery, I started 2 years prior to him, because the seed was dropped. Because I think a lot of people think, well, I'm not the one with the problem. Well, yeah, we kind of are. We kind of are. I was the unhealthy helper. And so I thought I could love him into recovery and do all kinds of stuff. But I had to figure out how to care for him from a distance and work a recovery program, which I started 2 years before he did. And it evolves. And as that evolves, we evolve. And then as we all get healthier, we can find our way back and to reconnect.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that you do in your work, is rebuilding those relationships, mending the relationship. Can you talk about what the process is for, whether it's somebody, a marriage, a partner, or a parent? How do you mend relationships?
Yeah, it's really hard. So often, some of my clients come when their loved one is in active addiction, and others come when they're in recovery. But it's great that they're in recovery now, but as you point out, the relationship is in tatters still. So they found a way to address their sobriety, but how to heal and recover from a relational point of view is very different. And the pressures that brings cannot jeopardize the recovery. So,
and also, if I can interject, I know for me, and I think it's very common that the person who doesn't have the SUD, who is the unhealthy helper, can be toxic to that person's recovery if they don't understand recovery. Because now you have a new mistress, a new lover, that's AA or NA or whatever meeting, whatever your pathway is. And here we are sitting alone again.
Yeah.
I remember one Thanksgiving do you really have to go to a meeting today? You go, it was 90 meetings, 90 days for my son. I said, this is your first holiday home. Spend it with your family. He goes, Mom, I can't. And I remember feeling jealous and irritated. I learned to let all that go, but that's what happens. I mean, that's the reality of all of this, right? We become toxic to their recovery.
We can do, if we don't really understand and we don't have our own place to go and to open up and to express our frustrations, our anger. What I often see is that it's that the loved ones have literally been holding their breath during the person's active addiction. And it's only when they finally enter sobriety and recovery that the loved ones, the partners, the parents are able to exhale, are able to fully recognize how much stress they've been carrying and how much anger they have at all of this. So it's only when the person becomes well, and I see this very clearly in couples, and I saw it in myself too, the partner reaches a certain level of sobriety and we feel as if they can finally deal with being told just how much stuff they put us through and how bad it's been for us. And that's often because we don't have anywhere else to turn to express all of that. And the marriage is still, or the relationship is still very fragile. It can't take that.
Right.
So that's why I say, as partners and as parents, we have to accept that recovery will take our loved ones away from us for a very good reason. It's not like addiction and they'll come back, but they now have this other part of them which will always be there, will always be a part of their lives, and it will always have to take a priority. So my husband's sponsor, and then actually now my husband's sponsees, will always be a part of our lives. They will always go to meetings. And that's how it will have to be. But it's at times difficult, I think, for the partners and the parents to have to accept that just because they've sobered up doesn't mean this now ends. It just changes.
Right. Yeah. Because I know a lot of the parents would be like, well, they're in recovery, so this is over. We don't need to do this anymore. Yeah. We need it more than ever.
Yeah.
Because again, we'll be toxic if we don't understand how to move forward and how to, have a relationship without, spewing our resentments towards them, our anger towards them. And, most people become financially and emotionally depleted.
Oh, yes.
And we're working on restoring that, and then they're working on restoring themselves, and we're all works in progress. But if you don't understand the dynamics of it, it can get really messy.
Yeah.
And everything can fall apart.
So I absolutely advise everybody to go educate themselves on what addiction is really about, what substance abuse disorder really means. I encourage people to go have their own place to get some support, be that a fellowship. It doesn't have to be AA. It can be, alternatives to that, or it can be therapy, but it has to be an addiction-informed therapy. It can't just be any therapist. And whether they are parents or siblings, well, particularly with parents, I also encourage them to invest in their marriage or their parental, the relationship between mum and dad, whether they're divorced or they're together, that relationship, that co-parenting relationship will have suffered as a consequence of their child having this difficulty. And they have to strengthen that bond, because when it comes, and this better than anybody, if the parents are okay, the kids are okay, so you two need to put your oxygen masks on yourself before and stop fussing about whether your son and your daughter has what's going on for them. Strengthen the two of you, and then the family structure will be more solid. Yeah. And then when I deal more commonly, I guess, with couples where one or others had the difficulty, it's really about reestablishing a greater equilibrium, because quite a long time it may have felt like the person struggling with the SUD is the baddie. They came, they disrupted things, they made it worse, they ruined it, they changed the sort of unwritten contract of the relationship. They brought these difficulties, and the spouse, the partner, is the saint, is the victim. And there's always this imbalance. And I feel very much that we need to go back to finding some equilibrium, because otherwise we're just reinforcing that the substance abuse disorder problem is going to be the defining feature of that relationship. And that is a distortion of what's really going on. But as I say, they have to find their own ways to heal, and then they have to find a way back. And my first training was as a relationship psychotherapist, but my second training very quickly after that was as a psychosexual therapist, because I realized very quickly that working with couples and or with individuals who've got a relationship problem, if we're not going to talk about sex, then that seems really ridiculous. And our sex lives are affected by our substance abuse disorder. And that's a great way for couples to reconnect. So that needs to be part of the recovery as well. And often it's something that is not really spoken about.
Why is that?
I think it's because not so many therapists are actually trained in dealing with psychosexual issues. So they don't want to ask a question that they don't quite know where it's going to lead. Yeah. They don't know how to respond to the potential answer. So don't ask a question that you don't think you'll be able to help. And I think it can't just be British people who are a bit prudish around sex and we don't ask. But my experience as a therapist, and actually also as a friend, if you ask, people are often relieved to be able to say. So so now I always ask all my clients, how has this problem, whatever the problem is, how has that affected the physical side of your relationship? Mm-hmm. How is intimacy? What's going on there? Because that's a great resource to be able to reconnect people. And when it isn't there, it's a missing form of communication.
And how can you be intimate with somebody you're so angry with?
Exactly, of course. So we have to deal with the resentments, the frustrations, and all the anxieties that go around with, do I want to put myself in such a vulnerable position? Do I really trust that person? Obviously, if sex wasn't an important component of a relationship, I'm not here to tell anybody that they have to have it, but it's only a problem if it's a problem. And quite often it will. I don't know of an alcoholic, for example, who's had great sex during their active addiction. And I don't know of any addiction that doesn't impact somebody's sexual function, usually for the worst. Mm. So it's always it's one of the hidden casualties, I think, and something that's not always addressed. When people go into treatment centers, they will be asked, how has your substance abuse problem affected your health? How has it affected your work? How has it affected your family? They won't ask. 9 times out of 10, they won't ask about sex. And it seems, in my world, a big mistake, because sex will have been a casualty. It may well also have been a cause. People start drinking because they need a bit of Dutch courage to go out dating or to have sex, or maybe they're sexually anxious or sex hurts. So to have a drink might help. Or there are all sorts of reasons why addiction can get tied up in sex, or sex can get tied up in addiction. And it's one part, I think, of the recovery world that isn't always best supported. Mm.
Yeah,
we want people to recover and live full lives and to be healthy sexually, whether they're active or not, has to be part of that full life, and it often isn't talked about in recovery.
And I think too, depending on your generation, you don't talk about those things. Right?
Yes,
and if you're a good Catholic girl, you won't talk about it.
Yes, all sorts of things get in the way.
Religion,
absolutely. So religion gets in the way, cultural beliefs get in the way, all sorts of
generation,
stuff.
Beliefs,
family stuff, shame. We're all full of sexual shame as well. So that's just that's just my take on it, because those are the three areas that I specialize in from a professional point of view: sex, relationships, and addiction. And there's definitely a huge crossover. So it's where I'm passionate to try and help people.
Right. And so you have a practice in England.
I have a practice in England, and obviously, as with everybody, when it came to lockdown, we moved online. So now I see people online, and I see people across the world, because that's the glory of Zoom. We're speaking
Right.
across the continents, across
Yeah.
the Atlantic. Yeah, and I absolutely love my job. And the fact that I've had this personal experience, I don't share with my clients, but it absolutely helps to inform my work. And I believe it gives me a level of compassion that I wouldn't otherwise have. I'd have a lot of theoretical understanding, but I think until you've lived it, you don't really know.
Well, yeah, and I think, you can have all the book knowledge in the world and as a therapist, and you can tell everybody what they need to do or say or whatever. But until you've walked in another wife's shoes or another mother's shoes or a parent's shoes or whoever is affected, that life experience makes a huge difference. It's something, I think this is my personal opinion. You may disagree with me, but I think that's more important than the book knowledge because
in many respects, yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I think a lot of people in recovery end up then wanting to share their knowledge with other people. And obviously it's part of the fellowship program, but you will see a lot of addiction therapists who were once, in an active addiction themselves and who found a way to pull themselves out. And I am fortunate that it's not happened to me directly, but it's happened to the people that I love. And that experience will hopefully have shaped my work for the better.
So how can individuals who are facing, these challenges, these difficulties, find their resilience and their hope? How did you hold on to your hope that you could move forward and regain a loving relationship?
That's a fantastic question. And I think some people have a faith. I personally, I don't. I found it in community. That's where I got my hope. So I found it in the colleagues that I was studying with. I found it in the Al-Anon group that I found online. And there are some women in there who, we message, and, I've never met them face to face because there's this big gaping sea in between us, but they're very close to my heart. And now now we're on the other side of lockdown. I go to meetings once a week. And so I find it in my community. I find it in the community of people who've lived in my shoes. Mm-hmm. And I also find it in the community of my oldest friends. I think there's something wonderfully enriching about female friendship. And that's where I get my hope from, because we've got to share our troubles. We can't do this ourselves. This is too much for one person.
Well, there's a real thing is broken heart syndrome. Mm-hmm. And then there's compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
There's so much that the healthier person, so, we get really sick and we get emotionally and physically sick. Mm-hmm. And it's so important for people to be aware when they're in this world of chaos and crisis, because you're in that fight or flight mode constantly. Mm-hmm. When is they gonna, when's the shoe gonna drop, or what's the next thing? When are the police gonna show up, or am I gonna get a call from the jail or whatever? And that just destroys us. And PTSD. Do you have any coping skills for that sort of thing to help people not go there?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it takes a physical toll. So I remember that maybe 6 months before I finally was able to end the relationship with the partner who had the gambling addiction, I came down with shingles. So my system basically gave up and I came down with shingles. And then the problem with shingles is it doesn't go away. It flares up during times of stress.
Sure.
And lo and behold, when my husband's addiction was really problematic, I would get shingles. I would get, and it would floor me. And actually, I can say, thankfully, in the last 18 months, I haven't had any shingles. And it can't be a coincidence that level of stress having gone, So I would absolutely advise everybody to pay attention to their bodies, to listen to that stress that you carry, the aches and pains, the little things. It's not the big things, it's the little things, because your body doesn't forget the level of stress. You can tell yourself that you're okay and that you're doing better. And actually your body is tired and it's aching. So I would advise everybody to listen to their bodies, to nurture their bodies, to sleep, to eat something decent, to indulge when you want to indulge, to move your body, right? So one of my lifelines has been running. I say running, I mean fast walking. I'm not, a speed runner by any means, but I do it because it's a great way that I can de-stress and I can switch off and I'm not thinking about anything. I'm listening to terrible, cheesy music. I'm singing out of tune as I'm sort of shuffling along the sidewalk. And that's great. That's what I do for half an hour and I try and do it most days. Yeah. And that takes my mind off something. So you have to find ways to nurture yourself and to pay attention to your physicality because it will have had an impact on you and you need to stay well. See, one of my biggest drivers was, I don't know what state my husband's health is in. Our kids are young. I need to work twice as hard to be well.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. So how would somebody get in touch with you? Do you have an email or website?
By email or so I have a website, kingsleycounseling.com. Drop me a line on that and I would love to hear from you. As I was telling you, Donna, before we went live, America is my second home. I've spent quite a few years out there. I have family out there. So I was delighted to come on your podcast. It's been a great treat. Thank you.
Yeah, this is wonderful. And I love it that we can talk to people all over the world.
I know.
So amazing.
One blessing from COVID, right?
Yeah, to realize that we can do this. Well, Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you're seeking solace and healing for your heart, I encourage you to explore my books at www.sharingwithoutshame.com. Within those pages, you will find more than words. You'll discover connection, compassion, and wisdom. I'm throwing out a life preserver to those of you who are navigating your loved one's addiction and working through your heartache. So thank you for listening today, and remember to be helpful, not hurtful, because kindness is the compass that guides us through life's intricate paths. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to support the Sharing Without Shame podcast, please subscribe, like, and leave a review. If you're in need of emotional support, Donna offers private sessions. For more information about Donna and the services she offers, visit www.sharingwithoutshame.com or email her at donna4support@comcast.net. Nothing in the Sharing Without Shame podcast is intended to establish a therapist-patient relationship or intended to replace the services of a trained therapist, doctor, or health professional, or substitute for professional mental health, medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Until next time, may your faith and strength heal your heart.